some questions, but I'll just start off with one. You know, your interest is so varied and so detailed, but what's the most interesting thing that you've heard in the last, month or so?
In the last month...
Or 6 months. What?
Something that shocked me and has left me troubled and a little confused. Probably 2 months ago, through indirectly, I received communication from somebody who would fall into the category that they had a military career, they were SEAL-type people, but their work for the various agencies have been what I would consider to be like when they need a specific body type, strength, knowledge, they will hire certain subcontractors to do work, and it might be for SEALs that are working for the CIA. Let's say that there are those kinds of links. And so this first contact is in that category. And he has a colleague who is currently quite active. And they are working with somebody who they call their mentor, who would be in the category of probably knowing McMaster and the people that now are heading our military in the United States. So there are layers here of authority. And when they first made the contact about 2 months ago, it concerned David Wilcock, Corey Goode, William Mills Tompkins, and any and all of the facets about archaeology of an alien nature on Mars, the moon, the backside of the moon, and Antarctica. Now, if it's 2 months ago and Corey and David have been talking for 2 years, the first thing you think is, well, I'm in an echo chamber from them. This is just somebody getting in touch because they want fame or notoriety or whatever they think that I can give them. And I really am just a humble investigative reporter. And the only thing that drives me is I really want to know the truth. I want to know the truth about our origins and the alien presence on this planet and throughout this solar system, and how far is the truth about a galactic war between reptilians and Nordics, as William Mills Tompkins has described it. So I heard this man tell me, I'm on an encrypted phone, but you're not. And I know that your phone is tapped. Well, my phone has been tapped for years. And I've had all kinds of engineers come in, and I got tired of it after a while. They say, your phone is tapped, and you'll have to do this, and you will have to spend this amount of money. And I just say, if the government doesn't know what I know, then let it be. But I'm not careless, meaning I have somebody who is calling me saying he's on an encrypted phone. He can talk to me for a little bit. My phone is tapped. And he doesn't know how to proceed, and he says those words, I do not know how to proceed, but I have very important information, and we need to talk face to face. And that began a series of, he talked for a while, and then a week later, I got a communication, an email. They blew up my phone after our last conversation. And I've learned that apparently the intel agencies, as marks of intimidation or trying to keep their troops in line, that they do have a way of sending a signal that goes in and fries phones. And they can do it on purpose. And they could do it to mine easily. So far, they haven't. All of this led, eventually, he sent me a DD-214, he sent me other records. I always try to ask for DD-214s from anybody who comes to me who says they have a military background. And it doesn't mean that I use their names if they need anonymity, but the one thing that every reporter on this planet should be doing with military is asking for DD-214s in the United States, because what it does, even if you opaque out huge sections having to do with any kind of personal knowledge, you are left with dates and times of assignments and locations. And I have seen DD-214s that completely contradicted what people have said, but mostly I have seen DD-214s that support and seem to verify what the person is talking about. In this particular DD-214, based on what he had told me about his background, it seemed to be somewhat supportive. Well, here is the part. All of this is background story. I'm traveling. I've been in 26 planes since the end of December. I was traveling, and I have a lot of people now walk up to me in an airport, "Ancient aliens!" I've even had people in Homeland Security when I can't get my purse, "Ancient aliens, I'll help you." And something like that happened, but quietly. And now I am standing facing the person on the other end of that phone call. And we spent time in the airport. Fortunately, I had a relatively long layover. And if you are very familiar with the William Mills Tompkins, reptilians are trying to annihilate blondes, blondes are trying to annihilate reptiles, and that the gray ebens play a different role, and that this has been going on for millions of years, and that the complexity of the war is really incomprehensible to most human minds. As it has been explained to me, the blondes and the reptilians started making cloned bodies. The blondes would make reptilian bodies and somehow move life force control into the reptilian bodies, knowing that they were controlled by the blondes, and that the blondes have technology that they can point at any human body and know what's in them. And the reptilians did the same, only they made blonde bodies, and they inhabited and controlled. And that the ebens, the ones with the pear-shaped heads, not the pointed chin, the pear-shaped heads, they came into this apparently with a different geopolitical territorial goal, and that we have had a three-sided conflict going on in this planet for a very, very long time. So with that as context, what this person in the airport told me was that he had done subcontract work for agencies having to do with this secret war of aliens on the planet, but specifically what's happening in Antarctica. And this is the part that has haunted me since I talked with him face to face. I can't prove it, but I think it's worth sharing to this audience to think about. And if anybody in this audience has any knowledge that relates to what I'm next going to say, and you want me to know something and you want to protect your identity, as to my knowledge, I have never betrayed a request for anonymity in my 40 years of working as a reporter and TV producer. I really mean that. This is what he said. The part of the reason he was coming forward and that others wanted to is their frustration of having knowledge that for the last 15 years, that would be back to 2001 or 2002, depending on where you start. very close to 9/11, right? That the United States was sending, in the months in which you can go to Antarctica, they were sending teams that were going in to remove bodies, remove hieroglyphics, remove stones, remove sculptures, so that eventually, if they ever brought the public's attention to there, it would have been cleaned of an immense amount of history. And I remember as he said these words standing to me, I felt a kind of pain in the sense that the disconnect between what I thought I was for the evolution of my life, an American citizen on a planet in which we were in a government of, by, and for the people, dedicated to a democracy that meant that the people are the ones who should be getting the information from the government, that should be serving us, and that we are now having rubbed in our faces all of the time that we serve the government, and that the government is classifying, categorizing, withholding. Now we've got 8 trillion black dollars that no one can account for in the 9. It keeps going up. And the idea that there would be a strategy by intel, counter-intel layers in the United States government that would deny us knowing in Antarctica that if it's 2,000 feet down to Lake Vostok or any other entrance, as I understand there is another one at pole or near the latitude, longitude zero of pole, and it is supposed to be a constructed ramp, 300 feet at least in diameter, going down on a slant to where there is archaeology, pyramids, buildings with construction they don't understand. And that for 15 years and counting, where are they taking that? They're putting them in, C-130s and larger transports and taking them to Wright-Patterson, Area 51, all of the places that they have hidden extraterrestrial bodies, all kinds of non-human technology. And now we're going to be taking archaeology from Antarctica into these same places that we have been hiding since World War II from the American public and the world, that we're not alone in this universe, and that there are all kinds of very advanced technologies that we have been trying to back engineer. Now, when I went to Google, I asked the question, when was the last date that Antarctica was free of ice? When you do that search, you will find that you get a whole, just goes on, and that there is no consensus, but there is at least a tiny bit of agreement that it might have been 13 million years ago. And as soon as you see 13 million years, and you think of the implications that in the 21st century, that somebody is saying that there is a United States government program that has been ongoing for 15 years in Antarctica to remove archaeology that could be 13 million years old. So that what? So that they can perpetuate an Alice in Wonderland fantasy. That somehow we're now going to be forced, by exclusion of facts, we're going to be forced into the next step about life in the universe, and it's probably going to come from exoplanets, the fast radio burst, something that's far away. However, I understand tonight, maybe on George Knapp, I'm not sure, that Tom DeLonge, who has done the Secret Machines books, and the brilliant researcher and writer, Michael, can you stand up? Peter, sorry. Tired. Peter Levenda.
Yes.
Wherever that series is going, Peter has been trying to deal with the nonfiction historic side, and one of the areas that may or may not tie into this archaeology, if it is in fact being salted and removed, is what happened in World War II with Hitler's obsession of having tall, blue-eyed blondes be the dominant controlling force on planet Earth, and the elimination of the Hebrews. And at its simplest, this is very disturbing content, I understand. But I really, really think we have got to face some of this instead of always walking away from it. The implication of World War II, if in fact it was, as William Mills Tompkins said to me, and it was on Coast to Coast in my interview, World War II was an extraterrestrial war fought by extraterrestrials, and defines the extraterrestrials as the reptilians versus the Nordic blondes. You can hear it. Go to my news website, earthfiles.com. Just search William Mills Tompkins and listen to the 2 parts that I have there from a few months ago of the interview with him about his work in the Navy and his statements that a lot of people want to say, this sounds crazy. But Bob Wood, who worked at McDonnell Douglas, is an aerospace engineer, PhD. Bob Wood is convinced that William Mills Tompkins is reporting facts. Bob Wood is the one who worked with him on the first book. There's going to be a second book out. And when you do start trying to go into certificates, photographs, and all of the things that you need from people from a lifetime, William Mills Tompkins can fill in those gaps. If World War II was an extraterrestrial war fought through human bodies on Earth, and if Hitler's goal was to populate the planet with tall, blue-eyed blondes and eliminate the Hebrews, you can start filling in the blanks yourself about who in this extraterrestrial war would be related to the Hebrews versus the Nordics. What no one has answered outside of David and Corey talking about the Adamites, A-D-A-M-I-T-E-S, that many of you have seen the illustrations. I've never heard of them before. I asked this face-to-face whistleblower contact, do you know anything about these Adamites? He said no. I said, well, what are the bodies like in the archaeology? And he said, that is the single most sensitive part. And he said, I've seen hieroglyphs, I've seen a pyramid, and he was telling me what he had seen in photographs, but the bodies they are keeping even from the people who are involved. What is the shell game? The extraterrestrials are playing a shell game, putting reptiles in blondes, blondes going into reptiles. Maybe the gray Ebens are making cloned hybrids that are doing some combination of this. Then the governments end up taking out archaeology that was perhaps 13 million years old because they don't want us to know what? And you can ask that singular question, who are Cro-Magnon, Homo sapien, sapien? And I think then you are really in a hall of mirrors with a quicksand floor, which is my workshop tomorrow.
Okay. Well, that was your first question. Now I know why people aren't standing here.
It's supposed to be conversations with Linda. So.
Yes, no, it's great. You give people knowledge. I see the lights going on. Thank you. You have a question? Come up. All right. Did you finish that question?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, there's way more, but this is fine. Go on to another.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, dear Alan.
So like many people, I'm probably confused because there's so much information out there. So if if Google is telling us that Antarctica has been frozen for 13 million years, give or take.
13, yeah.
A few million. And we had testimony from Corey and Bill Tompkins, I'm not, or maybe it's Pete Peterson, that beings from Mars who actually came from the planet that exploded, that's in the Kuiper Belt or the asteroid belt, then went to the moon, and then some of them came here 500,000 years ago and crash landed on Antarctica, where apparently the ancient builder race was. Well, I'm going all the way around.
And the builder race is supposed...
I do.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I guess there were several crashes there and vehicles. But then 12,000 years ago, we had the big flood, which turned Antarctica, from what I understand, because it tilted the axis. If a comet crashed here, or however it happened, where do we get, is Google or the scientists correct in saying that Antarctica has been ice for 13 million years, or is that incorrect information, and Antarctica has indeed only been ice for the last 12,000 years? That's my question.
Thank you. I understand, and I understand the confusion. In your mind's eyes right now, just try to look at a globe in your mind, and that there's a northern hemisphere, an equator, and a southern hemisphere. And that everything I know from the scientists at the University of Arizona in Tucson who did the very first papers on this, and I've done subsequent follow-ups with them, and they are, at least they need to be acknowledged as the first who reported the nanodiamond in the black mat, carbon mat in North America, covering millions of square miles. And from their data, they concluded that whatever happened, it was approximately 11,500 years ago, which is that period of time when the saber-toothed tigers ended up, they've got skeletons where the spine of saber-toothed tigers, huge, literally were twisted 180 degrees. Yes, the mastodons were found with buttercups in their mouth, which would mean they were flash frozen. This happened extremely rapidly, whatever did happen. 33 mammal species went extinct in that event approximately 11,500 years ago. And the residue in all of this black mat, which is about 3 to 5 inches in various places where they have gone, I've looked at photographs of the black mat even in hard rock layers, and that the black mat is filled with nanodiamonds. Everywhere, nanodiamonds. We're talking about things you have to see with a microscope. But the carbon diamond can only have been made at a certain pressure and temperature, and the scientists work backwards from that, and they come out with a hypothesis that they have published 2 versions of and say that they think that it was a swarm of comets, and that the swarm of comets coming in had an angle into the northern hemisphere of this planet. Now, I just came from the panel with David and Brian Forrester and Andrew Collins and Mike Barra, and this is part of what we were talking about over there. Andrew Collins says that he has information that they have gone beyond the original science that said though the impact 11,500 years ago, when Göbekli Tepe was also being covered at Göbekli Tepe, where the scientists have been looking for examples that this was global, they couldn't find it. Andrew says that they now have evidence in Belgium and some other places that would suggest at least the northern hemisphere was affected by something that came in with heat and pressure and speed, but that its impact is in North America and may be that the Great Lakes are ground zero. The southern hemisphere is not in this story. except that some people have suggested that whatever hit the Northern Hemisphere hard enough to do all of this in the Northern Hemisphere may have literally tilted the Earth in some way off its axis. My intuition of having covered so much in science my entire career is I don't think that makes sense. But I'm now personally going to do more investigations with people about the idea that there could have been any adjustment to the tilt of an entire planetary mass by comets hitting, even if it was all of the Northern Hemisphere. I don't know what the physics and the physicists and the geophysicists and the geologists would say about that, but let's just throw it out. We just discussed that over in the amphitheater. And you can see that if 11,500 years ago, even if the Northern Hemisphere was impacted with all of this, and it's the gases and the elements that were in these comets that caught fire in the atmosphere as they came down, is the hypothesis that created this black mat. Antarctica is not in that scenario. So it's a big leap for me to think that whatever was happening in the Northern Hemisphere, that it could have done any massive or total melt of Antarctica. So in all hypotheses, you've got to find that some kind of fact can support all of it. So let's say right now today, for the sake of this discussion, so we don't get off track, that the flood that is hypothesized to have raised water 300 feet, and there's no argument about that whatsoever. There are all kinds of archaeology at the Black Sea and various places that say X number of years ago, the waters were 300 feet higher. But if it is tied into 11,500, the covering up of Göbekli Tepe, which was built 12,000 years ago, 13,000 years ago, and maybe it was covered up because it is alien. It was providing something for an alien intelligence, and it knew that all of these comets were coming in, and it didn't want Göbekli Tepe destroyed for some reason. This is all hypothetical speculation. The idea that Antarctica, now 2 miles deep of ice, would have melted from this event in the Northern Hemisphere makes no sense to me. And I understand that the hypothesis is that the whole Earth tilted and that the environment changed. But until there is something heavier in data and science to explain that, I think that we need to just look at it as a Northern Hemisphere event, and that the Northern Hemisphere may have had something in melting in the Arctic and the regions that this would have occurred in the Northern Hemisphere, and there might have been a change in water levels. I know that doesn't match or explain the Noah story about the 40 days of rain. And if it is literal, I don't know that anybody has a bottom line explanation for Noah on the 40 days of water. But I would like to throw out to you a question that has been in my mind ever since I started thinking about the ancient texts and put some of this in my third book, Glimpses of Other Realities, High Strangeness, and that was this. In the, we'll call it the Christian Bible, there are these lists that go from, that include Abraham and the oldest Methuselah down to Noah in terms of the length of years they lived. And if I recall, Methuselah was something like 948 years and Noah was something like 430. Don't hold me to specific numbers, but it was something like that. And that if whatever this event was, that Noah gets communication that there's going to be some kind of a flood, and he's got to build this ark. All of us, I think, in this room would say he never built something and took all the animals of the planet onto it. But we're dealing in an extraterrestrial biological entity category when it comes to knowledge from human abductees and even from government whistleblowers. That we'll call them EBAs or extraterrestrials, maybe even other dimensionals. I'm not necessarily anymore thinking of everything has got to be from inside this universe, but that there are other intelligences, and that when it comes to the issue of genetic manipulation, geopolitical territory inside of galaxies that William Mills Tompkins is talking about all the time, that there are whole areas of the Draco constellation that are claimed by some form of reptilian, and that there are other parts of the galaxy and beyond that are claimed by others, then you get to this issue of these space wars, these galactic wars. What are the territorial battles about? And why would a Jehovah-type intelligence go to a human being and say, your world is going to be destroyed by water, and this is what I want you to do, and that the saving of life may have been an interpretation of what I think that non-humans have been doing for a very long time, and that is collecting sperm, collecting eggs, creating hybrids, that so much of the alien focus on this planet seems to be like we're on a planet that is looked at as a laboratory, biodiversity, abundant life, and water, and that many different species are using this planet like a laboratory, like a supermarket, collecting genetic material, mixing and matching, and making whatever they want. One man who worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency and retired back in 1999 told me, he said, Linda, there really were unicorns. Yeah. So, if there is this big flood, and Noah and his wife and his kids and some form of harvested genetic material from life on this planet, and maybe he's in a disk somewhere. But if it were literally true, now follow me on this because I really think this is important. If the Jehovah character comes down to Noah, and that everything from Noah on is supposed to be the reconstituted human species, and we go from 430 years life to 70, 60, 50, 40, wherever it was, my first reaction is, boy, that is unfair. And why, if it were literally true, why would the next creation be turned essentially into Drosophila flies? The way we do in labs, we use Drosophila flies to study genes because what? Their life cycle goes around and around and around so rapidly. So they knock the life down, the life expectancy of Noah down, and the Bible itself says every human on this planet is from Noah. I mean, that's the bottom line implication if you took it literally. So if Cro-Magnon, Homo sapiens sapien, and Neanderthalensis before us, depending upon, I'm assuming that it's okay to say that the crossover between Neanderthalensis and Cro-Magnon, Homo sapiens sapien was about 40,000 years ago. And that it is even puzzling when you look at what we now know about Neanderthals. They were robust. The cubic size inside of their brain skull is bigger than ours today. We now know from studies that they buried their dead. They put flowers on the graves of their dead because they found the various pollens from flowers. Who made the decision to replace Neanderthalensis with Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapiens so abruptly about 40,000 years ago? And then, who 11,500 years ago, when Göbekli Tepe was buried on a planet that maybe was inhabited by 1 or 2 or 3 non-human civilizations for reasons that had to do with harvesting metals, manipulating all kinds of things on this planet for reasons that are not clear, why would that whole story, in terms of so-called biblical literature, come down to one human called Noah, who goes from 430 years on one side of the flood, and we come out the other somewhere around 30, 40, 50, 60, because they really died young then. It seems to me that that story alone, the Noah flood story, is like the laboratory where they're through with one thing and they want to do something else for reasons that we don't fully understand. And if all of it is a legacy of the Anunnaki as an extraterrestrial presence way further back, and if it is true that the Anunnaki fought over everything, family, Enlil, Enki, and all that they were surrounded by, and that they nuked each other. That's the story in this new book by Chris Hardy, The Wars of the Anunnaki, nuclear self-destruction in Samaria. And why do she and others, John Brandenburg, the physicist at Berkeley, who has presented a paper about hydrogen blasts on Mars last fall, why do they even come close to arguing that there were nuclear atomic blasts on the Earth? It is because 6 places on Earth beyond the Trinity site where we had the first atomic bomb test. You go west of Egypt, Pakistan, parts of India, there are areas, the Sahara Desert, and there is trinitite, which is melted sand from something like the atomic bomb. Why would they exist? Well, in her book, she says it was because the Anunnaki went so far as to nuke each other in family wars. And they allegedly made Homo sapiens sapien. Is that why we are so violent and capricious? I don't have all the answers, but I'm laying out to you now the things that I actually am concerned and think about. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Next question.
I'm a little nervous, Linda, so please bear with me. First of all,
You have nothing to be nervous about. I am a humble reporter. That's
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I'm a huge fan. I never miss an episode of Coast to Coast that you're on, so this is really an honor. Appreciate it. I hope I'm not changing the subject too much, but I just have a quick question about your presentation on Friday in regards to the metal parts that were allegedly from Roswell that were sent to Art Bell in the mid-'90s. And just a quick question, was just wondering if there were any efforts or if you had any plans or ideas to maybe get those results analyzed further or analyzed again to maybe hopefully replicate some of the anomalous isotopic ratio results that you saw. I also heard Jacques Vallée earlier this weekend. He's kind of talking along the same lines, so I thought it was pretty interesting. But
Jacques asked me, would you be willing to have him take a piece? I said, absolutely. But remember, you guys, I did isotopic ratio on the magnesium, and there are only 3 elements pure bismuth. They haven't found anything else in the black layers except pure bismuth. And then in that magnesium zinc layer, 96, 97% magnesium and the rest zinc, when we did the isotopic ratio analysis, it cost, as I recall, it was $850 or $60 to do that, and Art and I split that cost. And I went to the Carnegie Institute in Washington, D.C., a man named Eric Howe, Hauri. He was the ion probe technician. And we worked together for 7, maybe 8 hours. It was really long. And I had a slice that he put into this cage that goes into the ion microprobe. And I remember that Eric Howe was first surprised that there was no lead in the bismuth layer at all, which on the periodic table, lead and bismuth are right next to each other, and he expected to find a little lead. They were pure. And then when he went to the magnesium zinc, we found that there was 11% more magnesium 24 in the layers of this metal that allegedly came from the bottom of a wedge-shaped craft in 1947 in New Mexico. And that it wasn't big enough to throw it out of the possibility of an anomalous Earth specimen, but it was 11% more magnesium-24 than our baseline sample. And then he was subjecting the metal to various tests, and he did one over and over again, and he found and gave me a graph that the metal, the bismuth magnesium metal, emitted 60 times the amount of positive ions as the control. And that raised an interesting question that if this were a fabric from an extraterrestrial craft, why would the bottom be made to emit 60 times positive ions? Is that part of the cloaking device that we see them turn into clouds? That was a question. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Hi, Linda. So regarding the tall Nordics battling the reptilians, what planets do you think the tall Nordics are from? And are there any that you are aware of still living here on Earth? Thank you.
Boy, I wish I had definitive answers. The only thing I can tell you, I like to come into things through the lens of science as much as I can and then work out. The most common source for blonde beings has always been through the literature, even going back 5,000 years, the Pleiades. When you go to an astronomer, they will say the Pleiades are young blue stars, that they are only X% of what is needed for them to fully become mature, and if there were solar systems, there couldn't be life. That's the standard astronomical description, which doesn't mean that blondes coming from Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 or out from the KIC star that I understand since Thursday has been getting darker and darker and darker. Have any of you heard this story? The Kick star getting darker, darker, darker. Wherever it is, wherever they might come from, there is this mythology on the planet that they came from the Pleiades. And there are other stories that Hitler was dealing with beings from Aldebaran. That's a whole other system. And the problem is, and then there's Jerry Wills from Arizona, and he's the one who went to Peru, went through the rock door, seemed to go to another dimension where they told him that he came from a universe they had created in a lab there. It got out of control, and that they are amazed that there is this much life in the universe that they made. He was told by a blonde that he interacted with when he was a boy, totally consciously. This being called itself Zo, landed near his farm, straightforwardly. The Zo character wouldn't let him approach the craft. which when you go back to the 50s and 60s, you'll find a few cases where there was warning about approaching the craft. And today we know through all of the research at RAF Bentwaters that John Burroughs and these other men at RAF Bentwaters were probably exposed to terahertz frequencies that are defined in an investigation by the MOD called Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, technical analysis, that unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, emit these terahertz frequencies, and the words are in the report, that can manipulate human minds and damage human tissues. So if you go back in time to the 50s and 60s when, as in this case, Zoe warned Jerry Wills about approaching the craft and then came back and got him, that there may have been blondes that have some real concern. They may have some genetic relationship to some of the bloodlines on Earth. But where any of these come from, like this Zoe told Jerry they were from Tau Ceti. Back in 1989, Forrest Crawford at the Eureka Ozark Conference brought a photograph that was supposed to have come from Carl Sagan, the astronomer's office at Cornell, who was working with Drake of the famous Drake equation about how many planets in the universe might have life. And he showed this as part of a case where allegedly a humanoid was interacting with some people and said that they were from Tau Ceti, and that Carl Sagan and Drake had this being in an office someplace and was trying to crack the telepathic communication. Now, these are stories that come out there and people walk away because they seem too incredible. But if this is true, then Tau Ceti, which is very close, about 12 light years from Earth, Tau Ceti might be the source for the blondes. Go ahead.
I've been hearing a lot of great things about intentions with the benevolent extraterrestrials, and I'm starting to wonder also about the animal connection. And Native Americans had, totem poles. We have the reptilians and then the felines, and it's all kind of things we recognize that we have here on Earth, and we all have pets that we love. And I'm all questions about, can they sense these things? Do they have any roles here with us?
The animals as
what we have here as our companions.
That the non-humans have made the animals here?
No, because we rescued, with Noah's Ark, there's a lot of concern with preserving all the life here on Earth and the diversity. We have pets as well, and a lot of humans, have fur babies and are really connected to animals, and there's a lot of animal connections with the Native Americans. Like, do the normal animals here on Earth have any roles to play?
Well,
our development or guiding us in any way?
If you start with what the CIA, DIA people have said, Earth is considered first and foremost a laboratory. If you start there, then experimentation trumps survival of anything that's made.
Well, also more spiritual, like how the Native Americans, have animal totems and guides.
The totems.
Stuff like that.
Well, you could say in the abduction syndrome, when people have described, I was out in my garden and I turned around and an owl was staring at me, or a deer walked up and I had symbols in my head. I don't know whether there is a blurring or a substantial meeting between, let's say, the human abduction syndrome and manipulation of minds by non-humans and Native Americans seeing qualities in animals and building totems to them without having any influence by the non-humans. It's an interesting question, but I just recently was doing a week of work with Ancient Aliens on 2 completely different projects. And one of them, I was in Taos with the crew, and the question was a specific area of granite mountains and an iron mountain where allegedly an object was found in the 20th century that is being described as extraterrestrial, found in this iron mountain. And one of the things that we began discussing for this segment on Ancient Aliens was the Anasazi, the name from the stars. The Anasazi dominated this particular area going up and around Taos and out east and west and north. And one of the biggest mysteries is that for a very long time, maybe 5,000 years, the Anasazi built these beautiful, based on circles, places that they lived out on the flatlands. And then suddenly, between 1230 and about 1250 to 1280, going back to that century in time, the Anasazi went from all of these beautiful horizontal places up into the cliffs. And archaeologists are so puzzled because there are places where these cliff dwellings are that you'd have to be, they think, you'd have to be an adult and you'd have to be doing this, sliding along a wall to get past a path that comes down like this. And so just on a common sense level, the archaeologists say, how would you get children in and out? And that many of these places, there's some areas in those cliff dwellings, it's 150 feet from, and they didn't have 150 feet long ladders. How did they get from here to there and up? And the reason why this is very interesting is because archaeologists themselves are raising this question. What happened in that 1200 century that the Anasazi that had been there for so long as people from the stars with making these beautiful geometric tracking the solstices and the equinoxes with the most elaborate slits and spirals where the light is just out. Chaco Canyon is just brilliant. And they went up, and the archaeologists say it seems to be a move of paranoia, as if all of a sudden all of the tribes were terrified of something. And then by 1300, it was all over. And in history, we just simply say the Anasazi disappeared. Where did they go? Were they lifted off by ETs? Well, there is a parallel to this that I've heard from somebody who worked for the CIA and retired. And you have to take these facets that you get from people. I can't prove it, but this is very interesting and possibly germane to the Anasazi mystery, because it's the Mayan mystery of disappearance. And this man said he was working for the CIA, had an assignment that took them to India, Nepal, Bhutan, all looking for specific assigned parchments, artifacts that were actually extraterrestrial. And that he was describing for me part of what it was that they were researching, and he said, this is part of what our mission brought back this information from somebody in Bhutan. And that it was that the last serious manipulation of DNA changing a human, Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapien, to something else happened 2,500 years ago in what we call the nation of Bhutan in Himalaya. And that the hybrid that was created from that DNA, and this is how this man was talking to me, he said they took one or more of the hybrids that would be part ET and part Bhutanese and lifted them in craft and put them down in the Yucatan, Belize, and Guatemala. And that this were the Mayans. And that at 850 AD, he said it wasn't drought, and said this in, we don't understand why this happened, except that we know our Earth is used as a laboratory. He said, we do not fully understand what happened, because he said these were Ebens doing this experiment, not the Nordics or the reptiles. And that they came and took most of the Mayan population away. And he said, we are told that there is an entire planet that is the Mayan civilization, that there is another planet that represents all of the dinosaur experiment, 85 million years on this planet, an experiment that ended with an asteroid. Whether or not it was deliberate and calculated by the non-humans, he said, we don't know. But after the 85 million year dinosaur experiment was over, what came next? And it was the rise of mammals.
Hi, Linda.
Hi.
Thank you for everything you do. I have a lot of respect for you. Just want to say that, first of all.
It's hard work.
I was hoping you can clarify some confusion that I have basically about, you brought up that the World War II was fought between the reptilians and the Nordics. And you kind of implied but didn't give a definitive answer to who was representing who, right? And kind of implied that the Nazis were pretty much representing the Nordics, right? Is that kind of what you were implying?
Hitler was manipulated by something that wanted blondes to dominate. And so the assumption is that the Nordics were manipulating him, but that the reptilians were involved also in a deceptive manipulation of Hitler and those around and the Tool Society and all of it, because the reptiles could camouflage themselves as blondes, making the whole situation incomprehensible.
Oh, that kind of clarifies what I was thinking. Okay, so I guess my last question then to that, the follow-up question to that is, so was Hitler working with both of them, the reptilians and the Nordics? Is that what you're getting?
I would ask this question first. Was Adolf Hitler conscious at all of what was manipulating him? He, like Trump, like a lot of leaders, people who like to have power, their ego becomes the most important part of their life, I think quite honestly. What we don't know is, what dreams was he having? Was he abducted? Was he abducted by blondes that were Nordics and blondes that were reptilians? That's a possibility. He could have been his own physical, mental, emotional warfare in one being. Adolf Hitler, and actually Peter Levin should be here. It is a complex story, but the residue that is left having to do with William Mills Tompkins, who was in our Navy department trying to help them by drawing scale models at that time of World War II, and becoming exposed to this, what everybody else would think at the time was science fiction, that there was really a Battlestar Galactica, that there were reptilians and blondes fighting each other, and they play in a very complex chess game. And that World War II, it's William Mills Tompkins. This is his quote. World War II was an extraterrestrial war fought through human bodies. If you take that sentence and you take the last few words, fought through human bodies, that seems to me you could apply to the history of planet Earth. And so when you come to what fuels some of us trying to understand the truth, it comes back to when everybody reacted a while ago to, this all boils down to, who are we? And if we are somebody's androids. And that we have been somebody's property for a long time, as Charles Fort said. And we've been deliberately kept as unconscious as possible about the forces of a control system around us for a long time. Then who put the soul in Homo sapiens sapiens? Because I have no doubt whatsoever that you and I have a soul. Yeah, I do.
Thank you.
And I think that the soul is the strongest part of everything I feel. And we are somehow on a planet that is becoming so disconnected by the digital age from even the concept of having a soul. And the soul has pressure. I feel the pressure of my soul. I always have since I was a child. And when you feel the pressure of your soul, and you begin to feel that it has a true allyship with what I call the divine field, I think the boxes that history forced on people are wrong. I don't think we should be thinking and talking in terms of the various boxes of religions and governments. But if you say that there really truly is some sort of a cosmological geomorphology in which there's a divine field, there's no entropy, there's no energy going down, the alpha to the omega to infinity is always there. There is no time. But that it can create a multitude of matter worlds, universes. There may be an infinite number of universes. But not all beings may have positive souls, as I'm trying to discuss. And if the really only game in town of all the universes has to do with the teaching and the soul recycling for a number of reasons, and perhaps the divine field, the ultimate goal, you could have an infinite number of universes, trillions of life forms with consciousness. And maybe what the divine field wants is to see, ultimately, where time has no meaning, would every single soul ultimately, out of the battles and the forays of being souls in universes, choose to return to no entropy and no more matter world? Somehow, it seems to me that everything we're in is sort of that big. And that if you do begin to feel the pressure of your soul in life, I think it guides you tremendously. But we are on a planet where all kinds of forces have tried, it seems to me, to disconnect our connection to our soul. And now where people are looking at the 3x5 glasses all the time, and basically a lot of people are only living through this thing in their hand, we're getting further and further from what I think is the power of being on this planet, and that is being in the pura vida, as they say in Costa Rica. And for those of you who have been there, you know what I mean. That is one country where you feel the vitality of something that is more than just air and water. Peru was like that to me as well. Ethiopia. I once did a documentary film for UNICEF in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And it was about child survival, and this was 1984, and it was the first time in the history of Ethiopia that they were now collecting trash from inside the city and taking it to landfills, massive. And the crew and I had picked out one of the landfills to climb up on to get a wide shot. And we were up there and we were just filming out, looking at all the children that were coming in and out of holes. They lived in the landfill. And I heard a sound behind me. We were up on one of those big safari trucks, the cameraman, the audio guy, me, and the equipment. And I heard a sound, and I turned around, and there was a man. He had a stick, and he had a ring of white hair, and you don't see white hair in Ethiopia because everybody dies early. And while I was there were 2 new strains of cholera, and doctors from Harvard University were there studying it. At dinner the first night, they said, treat your hands and your arms as enemies and continue to drink nothing but alcohol the whole time you're here. And the reason was, they said, cholera does not do well in acidic blood, and they said, that's what we're going to do. Don't drink anybody's water. Don't drink anything but alcohol, which we did, and it was just like taking medicine. So we're filming all these children that are coming in and out of the holes, and I turn around, and this man with the white hair, with a stick, he's like this. He's struggling, he's bent over, he has scoliosis. And I saw him do this, like this. And I'm standing up at the top of the ladder, and as his hand came up, he couldn't stand up because of scoliosis. But I realized, oh my God, we're in his house. And he's extending his hand to me as a guest. And that pressure in my chest, I felt like it was going to explode. It almost hurt. And I didn't want to cry. I'm in his house. But there was something about it at that moment. If somebody said, who was the most noble human being I had ever met on planet Earth, I think of that man. He's living in the first landfill in Addis Ababa, and we didn't know we were parking in his house. And he comes out and extends an introduction. And he said, Exerstalin. And in Ethiopia, Exerstalin, God be with you. And the cameraman behind me lived in Addis Ababa, and he came up and he touched my shoulder, and he said, he wants us to come down into his house. And I said, he's extending his hand, and if I come down on the ladder and I take a hold of his hand, I could die. Literally. They are immune monsters living in the landfill. Really. We are like raised in plastic bags compared to them. And every time, I was there for 30 days, and I followed what the doctors told me to do, and I drank a lot of wine. And I never got sick. But the one thing they said, don't touch anybody's hands or arms or anything. How do I do this and not insult such a noble, wonderful human being? And I decided that I would just go for it, and I just started going down the ladder, and the cameraman and the audio man, they're coming down the ladder above me. And this man, so full of grace, us in his house, where he had been like this is what he did. It was like he totally read my mind, and he backed up to give us the space to come down, and he never ever tried to touch us. I think in my work and other people's work, I am fighting for the preservation of souls. I think we are something. I mean, there may be planets out there with Anunnaki from here to kingdom come, and they may have all the treasures, the material treasures of the universe. But I don't think they have souls like we do, which then comes to this very interesting question. The Greek had a word, hypostasis. Hypostasis is usually translated as above, so below. But hypostasis is also the joining of something from above or divine into the matter world. What if Earth has been a laboratory for millions of years? What if there have been geopolitical, territorial conflicts between extraterrestrials of all natures over gold, over territory, over all of that? And then the Enlil Inky type characters decide they need slaves. They make out of evolving primates, they create Homo sapien to be their androids. And they keep tweaking them to make them just intelligent enough all of the time to do a little bit more work for them. And what if there really is some sort of universal dimension or council in which there is an argument about what is allowable to do with life? And that in that political argument about what is allowable to do with life, there are whole sections that are saying, you stop cloning, you stop hybridizing, and that's part of the pirate world in this universe now. But that the counter to the Anunnaki and to any extraterrestrials would have been the divine field decides that they will insert a soul entity into this android creation, that those which made the android creation will never have souls like this, and that there will be reincarnative cycles from this group that will go out of this universe to other places, but there will be beings in this universe that never get out. That's a little much like the Gnostics, but sometimes I think something like that, the hypostasis that the Greeks described, may be what has made a difference between androids that the Anunnaki would make, that reptilians and Nordics and Greys would fight here, and humans fight, for God's sake they fight, but that we have souls that something seems to understand. Otherwise, why would the avatars of history bother to have come here? And they include Buddha, Krishna, Christ, at least those three. And it seems to me that you can argue a logical explanation is that if the new astrophysics, that universes and dimensions are nestled in each other, there's a person at NASA who calls it the 9-millimeter separation, that the distance from your flat face to the end of your nose, that throughout, we'll call it cosmos with a capital C, dimension, 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 dimension. But just like if you play a chord on a piano, C, E, G, each of those notes are created by a frequency. When you play the chord, you get a combination of those frequencies, but the frequencies are still separated. If we're in a universe where there are, let's say, 1 million dimensions, there can be 1 million notes nestled like a cord. And unless you have a technology or an understanding of the physics of those dimensional 9 millimeters, you will never penetrate the other dimension, above or below. And it seems like I'm beginning to feel like physicists are moving their way toward this. NASA certainly is talking about it. And if there are other dimensions, nestling dimensions in which there are a universe or universes, then the idea that a soul that had grown more like a Christ, a Buddha, a Krishna, is in another dimension, and that there is some guidance that these more advanced come into other lower dimensions trying to help. That, to me, could explain the avatars of history, and it would, to me, be a reason why we all need to fight to stand on our ground. And no matter what shows up in the sky or lands, we don't get down on our knees ever again.
Thank you.
Linda, how you doing? I'm Matthew from San Diego. And wow, what a rabbit hole of a strange universe you've got to crawl yourself into, and I admire you, and I think you're the luckiest lady to be able to be that close to so much of it.
I can't imagine doing anything else, but let me tell you, it's hard.
if I had the means, I'd be right there, and I mean that. And you know, I've always had a tough time. From a young age, I knew what it was like to be human, just at the littlest dude. And I remember just hiding behind a dumpster one day and thanking God for these fingers and these fingernails and my hands and my feet. And I cried. And I even drive by that spot. My brother was, you know, playing soccer at practice, and I just snuck off to thank God for all this. And very little, couldn't even play soccer. I must have been 3.5, 4 years old. And
Sir,
had a connection with God.
Do you remember if you had any images in your head at that time that you remembered?
Yeah, I was just talking straight to our Creator, to God, who, by the way, I talked to him every single night since I was 3.5, 4 years old. I pray to God. I thank him for life. I've asked him back in those days, please don't let there be a wood, woe, thwee, because I didn't do my R sounds, and went through all that, and please bless Mom, and please bless Dad, and thank you for letting me be here. And that was just me to God at the youngest, all the way through prom night. Never missed a prayer, never fell asleep. No matter if I was drunk, I had to pray first. Then I fell asleep. Like right before I knew, I'm going out, I had to tell him real quick, thank you, and please bless the family. That was just my thing. And what brought me to that is then I majored in social science, history, and it was always baffling what happened to these civilizations. Where did they go? And then I was awakened to the whole aliens, and I knew, well, God still made everything. God made them. He made all the planets. Just what rationality means to me, like everything you just said is rational to me. Everything you just said is 100% true. And it's odd to me that I can go to my dad and my mom and anybody, and they can't even hear 10 seconds of this. You're some freaky conspiracy dude, you know, and they
do you have
mock it to everybody.
Do you have a question?
So my question, since I have children and I'm getting to that age, and as of Monday's Coast to Coast on Planet X, and knowing history and all the professors and all of us is slumped when it came time to, well, where did they all go? And before I say that, too, is the whole black ops and the trillions of dollars going on, and even they can't be human, because I'm human, and I can't hold a lie, and I can't hold secrets. So there's something more behind the background, behind the curtains, who Oz is, because what they're doing down there, like Dr. Greer knows and what we all know, is just too fishy that we can say they're pure blood human, because that's just crazy.
Well, from your experience and interaction with feeling a strong connection between your soul as a child and now, what is to you coming?
It's coming exactly what Monday's show is, which freaks me out, which the end of the civilizations obviously keep repeating themselves. I mean, we know 500,000, 1 million years, 14 million years, 13 million years in Antarctica, there were civilizations. It's just like, to me, the sun's rotating. This Planet X thing that's coming, it makes complete sense that's where they go. The gravitational pull, the pole shifting, the floods, I mean, and guess what? Who's safe down there? What are they doing with the trillions of dollars? Hiding down there. So here we are. I got 3 kids. I just got a 3-month-old right there with my wife. I live in San Diego. I'm like, shit. Okay? If this is really the time this is the period, and I'm thinking I had to come up here to ask you because you're the closest to all these people, to these geniuses, and is that thing coming that you know of? I mean, is there real, because you've watched YouTube and it says it's coming this month, it's coming in October, and then you listen to who was just speaking yesterday, and he says could be 200 years. It's like, okay, this sucks. Who's got? And the chemtrails hide it. We can't see it. Do you know? Is this sucker coming? I mean, are people afraid to tell us that do know because these who I think aren't human are going to come knock them out? Or, should I be looking for somebody that can hide my family? Should I be buying the water and the food? And should we be going underneath to see if we can't pull this off? Because
I understand the confusion, the angst. I really do. And for a couple of years, I've been keeping 30 days of bottled water in my garage along with ramen and rice and lentils. And I think of it as really as just a practical thing to do. But we are in a revolutionary time. And the world seems to be moving to more dangerous unpredictability. Maybe that's what I feel.
But it seems like the reset might be resetting.
Yeah, but the word I'm coming to is I really strongly feel you cannot live life in fear.
Of course not. But as the Zetas say in Monday, you could sit there in a lawn chair and let the tidal wave.
But you wanted to ask me this question.
Yeah.
And I want to tell you a few more words. You can't live life in fear. You can only try to do some intelligent backstops. And you already told me that as a young child, you felt very close to God. Today, in your adult life with a family, the one thing that you can do to help yourself and them more than anything is just put one foot in front of the other, trying to link yourself every single day to the force that you feel is your soul. And if you do that, you can't worry about whether a psycho in North Korea wants to ejaculate on the world.
But you don't particularly know. That's your answer. If Planet X is real.
You hang in there with your family and let the next person come up.
Trust your soul.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless you guys.
Well, I'd like to, I'm Kit Ralt, and some of you will have heard this question before. I'm trying to bring something to light. I guess we're going from the sacred to the normal, or maybe the profane, given the subject. And before I ask the question or make the statement, I want to say one of my dear friends happened to be right here, so I could lean on her, and she smells like roses always. It's her heart and soul. And when life is tough, our friends are often right there. And so my question is, what is happening in the area that Clyde Lewis called last year the Corredor de Muerto? And that's because of my dad's involvement, first as the captain of a PT boat in the Navy, the Bikini Bomb tests, where they then sent him to MIT and Georgetown, and he later became an oil man, and he helped Hale Boggs, Senator Hale Boggs, and Russell Long fund the Kennedy investigation with the Jim Garrison trial in New Orleans. And they called the group Truth or Consequences. I was a little girl, and I knew my dad never, ever watched TV, nor these other important men. So I'm asking people more knowledgeable than I, Clyde Lewis, yourself, and others, like, why was it suppressed? Was it a direct clue to the area, the town, Truth or Consequences, where now there is the spaceport, and Virgin Galactic? And since this is the 70th anniversary of Roswell, what significance is pointing us there, even from back in history, this part that was just covered up? As you all know, Ed Haslam, my dear friend who wrote Dr. Mary's Monkey, his father died in 70, Dr. Gatto died, George Getty Jr. died, not to mention the coroner, not to mention the death threat on my own father, many people affiliated with the Garrison investigation, which had the cover-up of the issues with Clay Shaw, even Dave Ferry dying, blah, blah. But so let me focus down on the here and now, which is what is happening in Truth or Consequences in that area?
Well, it is the spaceport that the state of New Mexico is trying to maintain for Virgin Atlantic, Richard Branson's, I can't remember, what does he call his launch?
Virgin Galactic.
Virgin Galactic versus SpaceX. And they're trying to come to a place where there will be an agreement on a contract of when Branson will literally have offices. And I don't know if any of that is resolved, but you're making a good point about it is an area of the planet where in 47 and paperclip and all of that, it was active then. It's becoming more and more active now. And the JFK assassination, to some of us who have read documents that seem so far to be genuine, show that Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, in 1963, probably 1963, there's a debate, but during the Kennedy administration, refers to Lancer, all caps LANCER, is asking questions which we cannot allow. This is from a document where Allen Dulles is writing to MJ 2 through 8 as MJ 1. And when you read those words, Lancer is asking questions which we cannot allow. It says to me as a reporter that the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, when Kennedy was president, was taking the position that MJ-12 trumped the power of the presidency, trumped the need to know, and trumped that the CIA had been given a charter to protect the national security of the United States, and that was more important than the life of the president if the president was threatening and demanding, which is what these documents say, that JFK wanted to know everything. There's a memo. He wants to know all files on UFOs. It's written there. And a couple of months later, he was shot in Dallas. Now, to complement that, we all need proof for things this serious. But going back to probably 1985, I was working on a documentary for PBS on a chemistry series, and I was in Washington, D.C. And this was after I had signed the contract to do the HBO documentary, and I had done A Strange Harvest and all of that. But people would seek me out to talk about certain things. And this man, he showed me an ID. I didn't really recognize the agency on the ID. I never have understood precisely, and he didn't want to discuss it. But he said, I have personally heard the wired audio in the Oval Office with JFK, with MJ1. And he said, you need to know that when John F. Kennedy said, I want every document, every letter, every photograph, every then 16 millimeter film, he asked for everything. That matches the document. I want all files. And I want it brought to this Oval Office, and gave them a date. And this man talking to me said, and the answer to the president was, sir, you do not have a need to know. At which point, according to this man, John F. Kennedy, with his voice rising, said, I am President of the United States, and I am your Commander-in-Chief, and I am giving you an order. And if you do not meet the date and the time of my order, I will hold the press conference of not only this century, but all centuries, quote unquote. If that's true, he was murdered because he was a threat to national security as it was analyzed by Alan Dulles, head of the CIA, who was the head of MJ-12, with the charter that no one was to tell the United States or the world that they were dealing with alien intelligences and back engineering alien technology. That classification of national security trumped the life of a president that would threaten opening that. And that's what Jim Marr's analysis is. This was coming to me firsthand from a man telling me this. And I think that as we go forward, if we survive in this century, I think eventually the truth on that has to come out too. Thank you.
I want to thank you all for bringing this to light.
Thank you,
Thank
Linda.
you.
We have about 10 minutes, so.
According to Darwinian theory, we came from monkeys, but there's a percentage of us who don't have the RH factor. There's no rhesus in our background, so we don't have any monkey blood in us. I just wondered, I have heard things about particular blood types and the RH factor, and particularly O negative blood, which I happen to have, and that there may be an alien connection.
I'm confused by this. Back in around 1989, when I was working with John Altshuler, MD, hematologist, pathologist, one night he called me up and he said, come over, I want to show you a section. And he had a hematology book. It was at least 3 to 4 inches thick. And we sat in his study, and he opened it up, and he showed me, I remember it was on the left side of a page in small print. It was something like 30-some blood types on the planet, all broken down in regions, and I never had any idea that there were so many blood types on Earth. And at the RH negative, there was a section, but it's not, the term RH negative and positive is thrown around. And there's A, B, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And I have read medical texts that are very angry at anybody who is suggesting that alien blood is proven by RH negative rare. But that night at Dr. Altshuler's office, what he was showing me, he was going through and saying, I think for the first time, I am beginning to feel that there is some reason why there might be a link through the RH negative, rhesus negative on these blood types. And I wanted to show you that here, the largest group on planet Earth, this is a fact still today, the largest group of humans on planet Earth with the most RH negative blood are the Basques in the French Alps. Well, the Basque also have a strange language that, like Etruscan, it doesn't tie into any of the so-called classic groups. So they have an unusual language that doesn't seem to connect. They have the most amount of RH negative on the planet. And then when you talk, which I've done, I've interviewed several Basque people about what is your relationship in terms of growing up and what people say about extraterrestrials out in the universe. And the answer always is, as far as we're concerned, we were put here. I've heard that now from several, we were put here. That doesn't prove anything.
Yeah.
And when you talk with medical doctors and you get sort of a confusing bell-shaped curve of possibilities of the relationship of RH negative in A, B, O, all of it, it isn't clear. And I'm not sure that there is a clear, well, let's put it this way. I don't think that it is something that I could, in a court of law yet, prove that negative RH, O, A, B, AB, I don't think I could prove that it meant that blood was hybridized, extraterrestrial, or whatever. But that doesn't mean that if we knew the truth, it is a representation of hybrids on this planet. I actually am coming to feel that of the 7.2 billion people on this planet right now, there may not be any pure blood Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapien left at all.
Yeah.
That everybody is a hybrid of some percentage.
And
we're moving to, you know where this goes.
Yes.
If this is happening, it means ultimately, just like Neanderthalensis was replaced, we're probably being replaced by a new model. And if we could be told all the truth, maybe there would be the ability to stand on our own ground and not be further hybridized. Or it's in the evolutionary cards for us to be quietly, silently, unconsciously replaced. That is a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Actually, we have till 6:15, so we have another 25 minutes. Okay.
Hi, Linda.
Hi.
This is kind of a confirmation and a question. Several years ago, while living on Maui, a man came into my home as an inspector, saw some Star Trek pictures on the wall.
Saw what kind of pictures?
Star Trek pictures on the wall. And this man appeared completely human. He opened up. He said he was had been an engineer at Lockheed. Had all kinds of amazing information. But during the course of our conversation, there was a point when his eyes completely became reptilian.
Became
reptilian,
meaning that you saw a transition to a vertical pupil from.
Yes, I mean, and he didn't miss a beat in the conversation. He just kept talking as if nothing had happened, and he didn't even seem aware of this transition. And I was so shocked. I mean, I'm very aware of reptilians and this and that, but I was so shocked at this supposed human. I mean, granted, he had this amazing knowledge and had
aeronautical engineering.
Yeah, and he had. I mean, when he saw the pictures, he said, "Do you have any interest in interplanetary travel?" And I just looked at him. I said, "Well, sure." And then my husband came home a little later, and this went on for 2 hours. This man in our home.
What was the most memorable thing that he talked to you about?
The fact that when he was working at Lockheed, that they had lost some people in experiments, trying to get them from one planet to the next.
Oh, teleportation.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't even comprehend most of what he was saying. It was, I was just let him keep talking. But it was, so getting to my question, what are these beings doing here now? What do you think this being, I mean, and this was the other odd thing, when we were having this conversation, he gets a phone call and he says, yeah, that's this billionaire. I'll be going to work for him in a few weeks. And it was just it was so completely odd. It always confused me. And I had not heard about the fact that a reptilian could go into a human body until I heard you talk about this today.
Yeah.
So I've been completely confused as to what this being was.
I'll tell you something that Jim Mars and he and I respectfully interviewed a woman in Dallas going back, this is probably 15 years ago. Jim called me and he said, take this number down, take this name, you've got to call this woman and interview her now. And Jim and I have been really close friends for a long time, and so I called her up, and he didn't want me to get the story through him, and what I heard was that this was a woman whose father was a political figure and leader in Dallas, Texas. And she had a lunch date with her father downtown and went up to the 33rd floor of one of the skyscraper buildings there and came in. Her dad was on the phone. She waved. He had a window that looked out over Dallas, which isn't much to see, but that's where she stood to look out. And she was just sort of waiting, and then just suddenly turned. She was going to go like this to her dad. And she turned, and she said, standing there with the shirt, the tie, the suit, was an alligator.
There you go.
And her reaction, which probably a lot of people actually might do. I think I would say, what the hell did you just do? But I can see her reaction, and Jim also thought this, knowing this family, that she just did this to her dad and left, and never confronted him, but told Jim and told me about what had happened. Now, how does this work? Only about 2 or 3 months ago, I was having this kind of a discussion with a guy who comes out of an alphabet soup agency. He's been retired for quite a while. But he said, I've heard you on the radio and podcasts and things talking about these shape-shifting reptilians and the different clone bodies and all of that. He said, I just want you to know that it's my understanding that with the reptilians, they broadcast a frequency with their mind to Homo sapiens, and that they can broadcast to a lot of people, and that when their broadcast isn't suffering a glitch, we would see a full-scale alligator as the Mother Mary.
Okay.
Now, why would there have been a glitch in that office between the daughter standing and where the father was on the phone? That's a very interesting question, and it has happened in many places. There's many stories. You just have no idea how many I've heard and Jim have heard where people, family, friends, and they see them switch. And they're looking at a lizard. It can be a lizard where it's smaller, pebbly skin, or full-blown alligator.
Okay.
And you don't hear about this because families don't want anybody to know.
Yeah.
They say, please don't tell anybody. So now get down deeper to really what's at the base of your question. What do the reptilians, what do the blondes, what do the ebons, what do the pointed chin ones like Whitley has on the front of his book? What do blues, oranges, what do any and all of them want now in 2017 with Earth and Homo sapiens sapien? And I find this to be a time of huge confusion. That's why I'm calling it a hall of mirrors with a quicksand floor at my workshop tomorrow. There are clear strains of things that are negative. If Jack Parsons, the director of the Jet Propulsion Lab at the beginning of the creation of JPL, had knowledge that we had a secret war between reptiles and blondes, and that he was going to access something that Aleister Crowley had accessed and drawn the picture of the big sort of triangular face being, and that if Jack Parsons began his research as a serious scientist trying to get to the bottom of what's interacting with Earth, and they did what? They did a magical rite called the Whore of Babylon ritual. And according to a book about Jack Parsons, and the reason why I'm going to this is, We think of the Jet Propulsion Lab, we think of science, we think of those areas as perhaps being the most stable and the most credible that we can lean on in revolutionary times. Jack Parsons may or may not have been a really left-brain, down-to-earth, pragmatic scientist, but he does, allegedly, by his own writings and people writing about him, and being a friend of Ron L. Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, does this Whore of Babylon magical ritual in which in the book it says that it opened up some sort of vortex or that let something horrible in here. At what level, I guess I'm going to say physics, what level of physics are we in when for centuries there have been magicians, sigils being used to protect all kinds of people in small groups from other groups because they were trying to work on things that seemed to have to do with emanations, sorcery, allying with something that would give power or health or something. And the Whore of Babylon was supposed to have something to do with connecting with some kind of power intelligence, but the book's own words say it let something bad in here. Would the Jet Propulsion Lab and NASA have any knowledge today that none of us have about what Jack Parsons, the first director of the Jet Propulsion Lab that has worked hand in hand with NASA and the Central Intelligence Agency, NSA, the National Reconnaissance Organization, they've all been like this. Is the beginning of all of that with a magical rite called the Whore of Babylon? And what would they have been trying to actually access? Now, this ties into a discussion. He was a United Airlines pilot for most of his career. He approached me in Atlanta when I was working on a program at CNN. He came and he said, I can only stay for a maximum of 5 hours, gave me the time, showed up at where I lived, walked in, sat down at a table. He began giving me a download that began with these words: Linda, you have to understand that not all moving lights in Earth's skies are craft. Many of the lights that are reported are tears in the magnetic membrane between this universe and another.
Wow.
Never forgotten. That was his first sentence to me.
That's pretty amazing.
And he's really got my attention. And and over the next 5 hours, and I mean, he came, talked, I wrote, and he left. It was absolutely almost surreal. But in all of that discussion, one of the big legacies was that he said, the U.S. government has been actively trying to counteract natural places in the United States and the Earth where magnetic fields collapse as if there's something between the Earth, the dynamo of the Earth, whatever is happening geomorphologically and out in the atmosphere and the magnetosphere. Something happens in this planet where magnetic fields that are normally protective will collapse. I don't know for how long. But at those places that they collapse, this is something Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso had in The Day After Roswell in the book. He labels 9 places on this planet where magnetic fields will collapse and all kinds of things can come in. That's what the pilot said, and that was the implication of Jack Parsons. Well, in 1982, 2 years after the broadcast of my documentary A Strange Harvest, I had another phone call from somebody who worked in an aerospace company. He said, I'm going to be in Denver, and I want to come and talk to you about something that you need to know. Out of that discussion, he said, I have personally been in an engineering project in Sedona, Arizona, and our task was to build a brick building, no access, no windows, and he sketched for me something that was shaped sort of like this and had slats. And he said, this is a technology that we have enclosed in this brick building with the express purpose to counteract the natural collapse of magnetic fields in this specific canyon in Sedona. And he said, we have been doing this at many places. Corso listed 9. Once you begin to think about this and ask other people, one of the things that you begin to be slightly overwhelmed by, if there are advanced intelligences out there behind, let's say, the fast radio bursts, other dimensions, to be here, they have to know how to penetrate dimensions or to move point to point in time. By what? Folding space-time. And that all of that physics that gives something else with advanced intelligence the ability to move through this universe in a non-Euclidean way and to possibly penetrate from many different dimensions, we're completely, as a human species, left out of that dialogue. So what has happened throughout history? We get stories about ghosts, fairies, lights, all of these things that have penetrated history, I think, are related to these issues of penetrations from other dimensional frequencies to accomplish something, and then they disappear, and we end up with paper, with stories on the paper, and there's nobody guiding us about the physics. And right now, at this revolutionary time, perhaps, if the governments will finally get out of the way and tell the truth, that one of the big explosions will be for the scientists, the physicists and the astrophysicists and the black hole studiers, and all of them need more information that, ironically, the alphabet soup are sitting probably on all kinds of information, unless they're getting it out through indirect ways all the time, that have to do with a completely different physics that would finally explain gravity. Yeah. Gravity is still a mystery to the vast majority of physicists. So the next step, if we could just get the truth, not only a release to all of our psyches in some way in the human family, which I think we are at a moment of claiming ourselves, we need to be freed from a control system. So do the scientists, so do everybody. And the governments are afraid of the consequences. I just don't think that we worry about the consequences, because we've got to reset this planet to a new thing called truth if we're going to survive. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
You have about 5 minutes. So 5 minutes.
Okay. Hi. One more question.
Wow, Linda, really, we all really appreciate the depth and the breadth of your knowledge.
I appreciate and love you. You're here.
But we find it very precious, so you understand. We really do appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now,
Thank you.
I like to put pieces.
We're all in this together, and it's a two-way street.
I agree. I like to put a lot of pieces together, and we've been talking about a lot of things at the conference, and there's been a lot of Antarctica stuff, and I've somewhat familiar with a few things. In 1952, the flyover over the Capitol building, my belief is that was actually Nazi, technology to prove that they had
essentially really won the war, and I can understand why they were pulling all of their energies to Antarctica at the end, and they had done a lot of underground labors to manufacture things to take down there. And so my belief is that Germany did a soft win of the war by coming into our country, and that actually they did win the war in a lot of ways, and that Hitler never died and all these kinds of things. So go ahead.
What's your question? Oh,
Well,
that's
let me give you a reality. Let me give you a reality check on 1952.
Okay, go for it.
From Leonard Stringfield.
Okay.
He had been in the Air Force. He did a whole series of extremely valuable reports, did a book called Situation Red. And I had a lot of conversations with Len Stringfield in the 5 or so years before he died. And I think one of the most important things he told me is in approximately the 49 to 52 time period, there was a standing order in our country by our government to shoot down any and all unidentified aerial phenomena. And Len said these words to me: "No one will ever know how many pilots and crew we lost trying to carry that out." And he said, "I personally have firsthand knowledge. By around 52, that flyover in Washington, D.C., this is Len talking, was essentially a retaliation, flaunting. We can fly over your most important building and city, and you can do nothing to us because something changed in their technology. Plus, Len said the payback was so painful that the insiders that would have been MJ-12, they rescinded the order to shoot down. My own feeling is it seems like I have thousands of files. And over a long period of time, you began to get a gestalt, a feeling of a whole lot of things. And one of the things that I think comes out of all of what I've read and these men who have talked to me and documents, whatever the possible Trojan horse that Roswell, Corona, Magdalena, that in July of 47, there may have been one accidental crash, but all the rest may have been Trojan horses, placed specifically to get certain technology in the hands of the United States government, and they were doing the same thing in Russia. They were doing the same thing in China. They were doing the same thing all over the place. I don't have a reality check on the differences of the technology that were placed in these different countries. But I have talked with people who said, "Linda, we know now we were given red herrings." And and the analysis is that the red herring slowed us down. And it looked like a Christmas card. And the more you're in this field, the more you begin to realize holidays, cards around holidays, they are very useful instruments for getting information. And the Christmas card said, among a bunch of other stuff about the Ebens, MJ-12 works with and trusts the Ebens, but they lie. And I remember reading the schizophrenia in that sentence, in that Christmas card. And what I'm trying to tell you now is, Whatever this 16-layer chess game that's been going on, I think, for thousands of years on this planet, having to do with geopolitical territorial control by beings that fight each other, but not with bullets. They fight by manipulating time. They fight by making hybrids. They fight by mental images. And there is clear retaliation. But the retaliation that is occurring in the grays, the blondes, and the whole menagerie is not obvious to humans. Whatever we are, we tend to be emotional, and actually we move to violence rather quickly. We're talking about a sophistication of extremely advanced minds that are fighting each other and want to annihilate each other, and when they're dealing with something like the American government, and they know they could take out humans anytime they wanted to. The fact that they don't is, I think, encouraging. Their retaliation is symbolic. They do symbolic retaliation, and they have been doing it for a long time in a lot of ways. In July 1952, over the nation's capital, the flyovers were, "You can't shoot us down anymore."
No, I get that, but I'm kind of wondering how it's kind of connected to the Germans, and essentially, if you see that as kind of a soft win, we'll say more.
See, I look at it differently. I think I'm not trying to say that I'm not trying to say that I have all of the hard 100% facts, but the sense that I have about World War II is that the blondes were trying to take over the planet. They wanted to pull the rug out from under the reptilians. The reptilians have wanted to annihilate the blondes. There's this third group called the Ebens. And somehow those Ebens play geopolitical deals with both. The Greys, somebody yesterday said that they had an understanding, may have been David Wilcock, I'm not sure, we had a lot of discussions, but that the blondes had gone to Hitler first, and that they had problems, and so they wanted to come to the United States. And that somehow, when the Ebens came into this geopolitical mess, they came with the idea of helping the blondes in the United States. And that it is the United States came out of World War II as the 800-pound gorilla on the mountain, and a defeat of Germany over ball bearings went out. They couldn't make their machines run. And that this was probably part of the extraterrestrial chess game. And so I do not think that Germany had a soft win until you get to the fact that the United States and the Western world that came out on top after losing way too many people, that in the, well, I had several things that came into my mind. The United States, England, Canada, New Zealand, and those allies, they all were sharing information at certain levels about UFOs and ETs. The argument yesterday was that the blondes came into the United States, which might explain that so-called apocryphal, I have no idea what's true, that Dwight D. Eisenhower met with a blonde, at least that's one version, out in the West, and that the blonde said, you must not do bombs. And that whether it was Eisenhower or General Twining or whoever it was, I've heard variations on this. They got mad. The humans got mad. And that their anger was the idea that something that was extraterrestrial would be giving them an order about what they were supposed to do. And now I add today's sentence. This is why this is a 16-layer chess game. If it is an extraterrestrial war fought through human bodies, but the extraterrestrials are working through every possible enemy ally, and they're inserting themselves. The reptiles are in blondes and ebons. The blondes are in reptiles and ebons. The ebons are in reptiles and blondes. I mean, it's just mind-blowing. But the United States and the allies at that point, at that juncture, right at the close of the war, I can see those men, those particular men, all of them were 33rd degree Masons, by the way. They would look at a blonde, a gray, or a reptilian standing in front of them saying, you are not going to do these atomic bombs or any other kind of bomb because you don't realize you are tearing into other dimensions. You are destroying worlds you have no knowledge of. Well, I think that is exactly what happened. But I can also jump over and see through a General Twining, General Eisenhower, Truman is president, and then comes Eisenhower. Those were the men, and I think they were trying to do the best they could. Right. And I can see how those men, those personalities, standing with however it went down of who was standing in front of them, no, God damn it, this is our planet. Right? I mean, you can feel that from those guys, especially Winston Churchill. This is our planet. And that's what I mean when I talk about the subtleties. Retaliation in a 16-layer chess game is not going to be obvious to us. But throughout all of this, during World War II, before and after, there are many, many examples where we're dealing with something that retaliates. And that's what Len Stringfield, that's why he wrote Situation Red. Retaliation, to me, means that something, one of these types, has a vested interest, in keeping humans controlled. Well, that makes me nervous. That's the part of this story that has always bothered me. World War II is like a lens into the geopolitical territorial conflict. We're sitting today where the psycho in North Korea could launch a missile that has radioactivity on it. Through what we've just talked about, would the force that is pushing the psycho in North Korea be reptilian, blonde, ebon, other? When you start looking at the newspapers, listening to TV and radio and going on the web and take this lens that we went through today and start putting everything through this, you start beginning to get the texture of a very different geopolitical scheme, and you start looking at every human. Which force is using Trump, Xi, Vlad, Putin, as they call him? And have humans always been sort of misused, abused this way? And again, you always come back to the same place that I'll end on. It is as if all of history is coming down to an intersection where humans, not the control system of our governments, humans, you guys, that there's going to be enough people that are going to start. It's hard because we have to pay taxes. That's another control. There's so many things that we are caught up by with control systems that are allegedly human, that can be used by any force. But whatever it is, we have to choose standing on our own ground and moving forward, demanding that we get truth, that we're not alone in this universe, and we never have been, and there are control systems here, and something about all of this seems to relate to when are we, the souls of humans, finally going to be freed from control systems? And that, I think, is exactly where the intersection is right now. And I'm so glad you guys came, and I'm so glad we have had this dialogue.
Thank you.
I've never had one like it.
Let's give her a standing ovation. Thank you.